Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Big Six, and today we are talking about Leeds United and why I am getting more and more bullish on their chances of survival this season in the Premier League. Yes, Leeds are back in the Premier League after 2 years away. They won the Championship last season with 100 points level with Burnley. They are back in the big time where they belong, and I think there are reasons for Leeds fans to feel pretty optimistic for the season ahead, but I also have one reason why maybe there's a little bit of doubt there, a red flag, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. So let's start by talking about the Leeds United squad. I think of the three promoted teams, Leeds objectively had the strongest of the three. I think that's pretty obvious. Even though they did finish level with Burnley at the top of the league, I think anybody who watched the Championship last season would have said Leeds were the best team. And certainly when I saw them, I'm a Sunderland fan, I saw Leeds twice. At the Stadium of Light, there was that Ilham Meldier nightmare, which cost them a draw, but Leeds should have won that game. And then at Ellen Road, Leeds turned it on and managed to win the game, turned it around later on. And from everything I saw throughout the season, Leeds were the best team. They just didn't really have a goalkeeper. And that's effectively what cost them winning the league by even more points. Whereas you look at Burnley, Burnley had a rock solid defence, but in terms of XG, they were pretty close. I think Leeds actually had a better XG against than Burnley, which shows that Leeds just overall were the strongest team in the league. So I think that was a really sound foundation for them. And add to that, they haven't lost anyone from that group. Burnley lost CJ Egan-Riley, who was a big part of their defence. And even look at Sunderland, they lost Joe Bellingham. I know they've replaced and they've spent a lot of money in their team, but there's still important players in those teams, whereas Leeds didn't really lose anyone of significance heading into this new season. And I think Lucas Perry, who has just came in to be the new #1 goalkeeper at Leeds, that's a massive upgrade on Ilham Meslier. I don't think Meslier was of Premier League level. I think he's probably a decent Championship goalkeeper, but he just hasn't progressed as well as Leeds would have liked. So I think Leeds definitely need an upgrade there. This is an upgrade there, and this will help them in terms of their defence and certainly make them less likely to concede silly goals, which they often did with Meslier between the sticks over the last couple of seasons. In defence, I'll read off the list here, but Joe Rodon, Pascal Struijk, Jacques Abidal, and Sebastian, and I'll apologise for butchering this, Bornewall. Is that correct? As well as Ethan Ampadu as well, though, who can play at centre-back but plays in midfield as well. But I think Leeds have a pretty solid defence, and I think their defence, certainly on paper, looks stronger than Sunderland's. It looks stronger than Burnley's. It looks stronger than some Premier League teams as well. So I think Leeds have got a massive tick in the defence box. And then into midfield, I think Anton Stack, certainly when I looked at his scouting reports, he looks like a really, really good pickup for Leeds. I think he's 26, he's a perfect age. I think coupled with Sean Longstaff as well, who I think that is sneakily a very, very, very good bit of business for Leeds. I think he is a player that I always liked when I saw him at Newcastle. I always thought that he added a lot of that team. I think he was sometimes a little bit of a scapegoat at Newcastle at times. I think he's a brilliant player. He's got goals in his game as well. He can box to box. He's what you want. He's a good height as well, and I think he's going to be a monster in that midfield for Leeds. I mean, he's been playing a lot of football for Newcastle, who finished in the top 5 last season, have finished in the top 4, have won the Carabao Cup. He's coming into Leeds, a newly promoted team. So that is a massive pickup for Leeds, and I really, really, really like that bit of business. And I think Tanaka as well, he showed himself to be such a good player last season. You've got Ampadu, can also play in that midfield as well. So I think Leeds have got some really, really good options in that central midfield area. And I think if everyone's fit on their day, if they were playing Longstaff and they were playing Anton Stack and they were playing Tanaka, they're a really solid midfield there. So I've been really, really impressed with what Leeds have done with their purchases and recruitment in the middle of the park. But I do think Leeds look light in the final third. You look in terms of strikers, Lucas Nemechas came in. I don't necessarily look at him and think that he can be a leading man for a Premier League team. I think he's probably going to be a fringe option. I also think Patrick Bamford, that there's a reason why he's not, been playing for Leeds United really, and that's just because he's really regressed as a player. He's had a lot of injuries. He's just not the same player that he was when they first came up the Premier League like 5 or 6 years ago. I also think Joe Peru is probably not at the level to start every game for a Premier League team. And Mateo Joseph, I just don't think is ready either. So I think Leeds definitely need to bring in a striker. I think they also need to bring in some, help on the wings. We saw Igor Paxao was linked heavily. He's ended up going to Marseille, so it's obvious that Leeds have got money there. I mean, that would have been a huge sign, like £30-ish million to bring him in. So there's obviously money there to recruit for that player. So I wouldn't worry if I was a Leeds fan that missed out there. They will move on to another target. Maybe like Bilal El Khanous might be a good bit of business from Leicester. He could fill in that gap in terms of the wing, can also play in the number 10 as well. So I think Leeds, there's plenty of positives there in terms of their squad. I think they definitely need to sort out that front line. I think that's what needs to be where their focus goes. But in terms of their defence and the midfield and the goalkeeper, Leeds are looking pretty strong there, and I think stronger than both Sunderland and Burnley in terms of the newly promoted teams as to their base, their foundation for the season ahead. And in terms of spend for Leeds, it looks like, so I read an article before on the Yorkshire Post, and it was £75-ish million Leeds have spent this summer. So I would reckon that Leeds are probably halfway done in terms of their spending. I think £150 million seems to be roughly what newly promoted teams spend. So you look at Sunderland, I think have spent 110, although they have sold more players. I think Leeds are going to spend more. I would be surprised to see that 75 million double into 150, and that means that they will answer the problems that we've just talked about there. They do need to improve their forward line. I think the money is there to do that, and if Leeds can add players on the level of an Anton Stack, but forwards, I think they'll do really, really well, and I think they'll be very, very competitive, certainly more competitive than the last 6 newly promoted teams we've seen. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic if you are a Leeds fan in terms of their business. They just need to get that front line sorted. But I mentioned at the start of the video, I have one red flag, and look, it's a bit of a minor red flag, but it's a red flag that's there nonetheless, and I think it's the manager, Daniel Farke. It concerned me so much when I saw after Leeds got promoted that there was question marks about Farke, that they might be replacing him, and that made me think, there clearly is a level of distrust there, whether or not that comes from the fact that he has failed in his previous attempts at Norwich when he's taken a team up, the fact he's only won, I think I saw 6 of 49 games, I think. Is that correct? Yeah, 6 wins from 49. Just looking at my stat sheet there. 6 wins from 49 as a Premier League manager. So I think there is massive questions there about Daniel Farke, and the fact that there was talk that Leeds might be moving on from him in the summer. I don't think there's any smoke without fire there. I do think that Leeds were considering that, and I think that is very telling and very interesting. And I don't necessarily blame the Leeds hierarchy for thinking that. There are concerns I have a little bit with Farke's style of play. Certainly when Norwich were in the Premier League last time, he tried to implement a style that was quite possession-based, very much like Leeds play now. But the difference is when you're the top team in the Championship, you can play a possession-based style and dominate teams because you have the best players. You have the best squad, the best players, the best resources. So you can dominate games in that way. In the Premier League, the unfortunate reality for Leeds is that probably for 25 to 30 games in the season, they are not going to be the best team. So can they go and play that very possession-heavy style and try to, pass teams off the park, dominate with them, the quick, incisive play and runs? I don't know if Leeds can. Now, I do think Leeds are very good on the transition, so that isn't to say that they won't adapt. I think they definitely could adapt, but my concern would be is if they are fixated a little bit on trying to stay in possession. And look, I get that. Teams play a low block, but they had to play a possession style of play to get around the low block. If a team doesn't want the ball, you're going to end up with it. And in the Premier League, that will be different. But I do remember when Norwich were in the Premier League under Farke a few years ago, both times it did feel like Norwich were naive often in those games. And that is a red flag for me. I look at Daniel Farke and I just don't know if he has it in him to adapt and get the best out of this Leeds squad. And also, if the Leeds hierarchy aren't convinced by Farke, how long does it take for them to make a decision there? Are we talking Leeds maybe winning 1 from their first 6 or 7 games? Are they going to look and go, do you know what, we need to make a change there? Or are they fully entrusting him and giving him, the full season? I don't think they will do that. I don't think Leeds are willing to take the risk of relegation. I think that Leeds want to survive in the Premier League. You can see that by their ambitious transfer business, and because of that, I think that they would be quick to make a decision if they had to want Daniel Farke. So that is a red flag I have there, and I think that management position at Leeds, that head coach position, there is question marks there undoubtedly because of the stories that came out at the end of the season. But my final verdict, and I would love to know what you think as well, I think Leeds are currently on pace to give themselves a hell of a chance of survival. If I was to put money on it right now, I'd say Leeds probably do survive come the end of the season. I like what they're doing. They do need to sort out that forward line, but I also look at the teams they're going to be competing against at the bottom, and I look at Brentford's forward line, say, and I think that's not looking particularly good either. So, Leeds could potentially, if they do get these players in, do get some new forward players in, they could potentially overtake a Brentford, and I could see that quite easily. So I think Leeds have a really strong chance of survival. I think they've had a very, very good window so far. I'd love to know what you think, whether or not you think Leeds have given themselves a good chance of survival this season. And yeah, please comment. I love getting in the comments in the debate. We'll catch you next time for another video beyond the Big Six.